Some stories take a long time to come out. Not because they're dramatic, not because they make anyone look bad, not because there's a huge skeleton in the closet. Most of the time, stories just stay quiet for reasons that really aren't all that interesting. Sometimes you keep a story to yourself because it belongs to a younger version of you. You remember that person clearly, but you don't necessarily want strangers thinking that's still who you are. Lately, I've noticed how foreign that idea seems to have become. The idea that you could mess up, learn something, and no one else would ever have to hear about it. Now, though, it seems it doesn't take much for a mistake to turn into something that everyone can see. One dumb moment can turn into a character witness. An honest mistake made in frustration, taken out of context, can end up online for strangers to read about. A bad choice can get passed around and picked apart by people who don't know you at all. It feels like it's easier now to end up on display than to just get corrected. And I'm not sure we really know what that does to any of us. We need accountability. Yes. We need correction. Yes. We need someone who is close by and willing to say, that was wrong. You need to stop. You need to make it right. But we need that without it turning into a show for everyone else. Getting corrected isn't the same thing as being exposed. Being held accountable isn't the same thing as being humiliated. Most of us don't get better by having our worst moments put out for everyone else to see. I want to tell you a story from 1992. I had just graduated from high school that spring. I was young, not quite a kid anymore, but not really a grown man either. Around that time, my grandmother passed away. A funeral director that we knew, a guy named Jack, handled the arrangements. A few weeks after the service, I stopped by to pick up Granny's death certificate for my mom. Jack asked if I wanted to make some cash that summer by mowing the grass and washing the cars. I said, sure. Mowing turned into driving the flower van and setting up gravesides. By the fall, that had turned into a full-blown funeral service apprenticeship. To be honest, the only reason I took the apprenticeship was for the place to live. I ended up in a 2-bedroom apartment above the funeral home, with his own private entrance up a narrow, rickety fire escape out back, as well as an indoor staircase that led down to the main parlor. Looking back, that apartment was a real mess. But for an 18 or 19-year-old, it felt perfect. Living on my own, with that kind of freedom, yeah, sign me up. It's a strange thing, though, being young and living above a funeral home. You're close to death before you really know what it even means. Downstairs, families said their goodbyes. Upstairs, I was just a young man, often with more time than common sense. Of course, the apartment came with strings. I was on call most nights, answering phones and dealing with whatever needed doing. And that meant many nights I had to stay home while my friends were out. That was hard sometimes, especially since I was close with my cousin. One Friday night, he stopped by on his way to the high school football game. I remember it was a big game, maybe the season opener or maybe homecoming. I was on call, so I couldn't go. He asked if he and another guy I knew could swing by afterward. They'd grab a case of beer, we'd pick up a few guitars, and just hang out. There were no rules against guests, and we'd done it many times since I'd moved in. That's how a lot of bad decisions get started, I guess. Not with a plan, not with trying to break the rules, but with innocent intentions. Just a few buddies stopping by on a Friday night. After the game, they showed up as promised, but my cousin walked in and said, "Hope you don't mind, I asked so-and-so to stop by too." Okay, cool, no problem. But then someone else showed up, and then someone else. After a while, there was a line of kids waiting on the fire escape to get in. If I'd had any business sense at all, I could have charged $5 at the door. I don't know how many people ended up in there that night, but I really only knew 3 of them. All at once, I had a crowd with lots of underage kids drinking, making noise, and raising hell at a funeral home. I'll stop there because even now, at 52, it makes me want to crawl under my desk. Not because I was some special kind of moron. I was just young and stupid the way young people tend to be. But it was wrong. It was disrespectful. It was careless. It was a mess, and it could have gone very wrong very fast. Nobody was in charge when I should have been. I'm grateful we weren't serving any families at the time. Nonetheless, it was all about to catch up with me. The former owner of the funeral home had passed away shortly before I started working there that summer. His son was running the place, and Jack was the only other employee. But the owner's widow still lived on the property in a completely separate wing. We never crossed paths unless she just happened to be out walking her dog. And you can guess who was out walking the dog that night. Her name was Jeannie. I had heard her mention earlier in the week that she was going out of town that weekend, which is why I was only mildly freaking out when everyone started showing up. What I didn't realize was that she was leaving on Saturday, not Friday. When Jeannie saw the line on the fire escape and heard the noise, she didn't come storming up the steps. She called the Abingdon Police Department's non-emergency number and specifically asked for Officer Edmonston. She knew him, and I knew of him. We were both from Damascus. His dad ran the video store. As I learned much later, Jeannie had asked him to come over and put the fear of God in me. Downstairs, the funeral home had a doorbell system for the telephone. If someone pushed the button at the front door, it rang every phone in the building. It wasn't uncommon for people to stop by or call at odd hours, so the one standing rule I gave all my guests was this: if the phone rings, you shut up instantly so I can handle business. The party had been going strong for at least half an hour or so when it rang. It took 4 or 5 rings for the apartment to quiet down. Because it was a doorbell system, it picked up on speakerphone. I answered, and a voice carried through the room. "Hello, this is Officer Edmonston with the Abingdon Police Department. Come open the door." Everybody heard it. And in an absolute instant, everyone vaporized. To this day, I have no idea where they went. But suddenly, it was just me, completely alone. At least it felt that way as I made the long walk downstairs through the building to the front door. The silence was hanging heavy now. You could still smell cigarettes and old beer, where just a few minutes before it had been nothing but noise. Every step down seemed like a march towards the end of my newly gained freedom. I opened the front door, and he asked if something was going on. I didn't lie. There was no point to. The parking lot and the kids running up and down Main Street said it all. I just told him the truth. A few friends came by after the game, word got out, and here we were. We sat down right there in the funeral home's front lobby, and we had a very frank talk. I've thought about what Jeannie did many times over the years. She didn't gather a crowd or turn it into a scene. She didn't make my worst judgment the main thing about me. But she also didn't ignore it. She called an officer she knew to set me straight. That probably sounds old-fashioned now, but that's exactly what it was. He didn't come to make a scene or to jumpstart my criminal record. He came as an adult, with authority, standing before a young man who needed to feel the weight of what he'd allowed to happen that night. And I sure felt it. I remember the shame, I remember the fear, I remember the understanding that I'd crossed a line. Not a vague one, not a made-up one, a real line. Most of all, I remember feeling like I'd been spared something, though I couldn't have told you what it was at the time. Mercy isn't pretending nothing happened. It isn't softness. It isn't letting people drift through life without consequences. Sometimes mercy is a consequence that leaves room for what comes next. It tries to shape a person, not just capitalize off of them. I got a correction. I got a healthy dose of fear. I got privacy. I got a second chance, and I tried not to waste it. The event stayed close enough to correct me, but not so public as to swallow me up. In fact, unless you were in the room that night or worked at the funeral home, you'd have never known that it even happened. Nothing more was really ever said about it after that evening, even with Jack and Sammy. It had happened. It was over. A lesson that could shape me didn't have to be the thing that defined me. I think that difference matters more than we tend to notice. It's the difference between being corrected and being exposed. People aren't born finished. We become ourselves over time. We're shaped by correction, by embarrassment, by forgiveness, by consequences, and by hearing hard truths from people close enough to tell us the truth. But if every failure goes public, if every mistake hangs around, if every foolish moment turns into some kind of proof of your whole character, something important gets a lot harder to do. Admit you were wrong. It gets harder to grow up. It gets harder to be honest with yourself or anyone else. People don't get better just by being exposed, not most of the time. Sometimes people get better when someone corrects them, and then lets them keep going. It gives the correction time to settle in and do its work. Now, privacy can also hide harm. I'm not defending the silence that protects powerful people or abusive institutions or any sort of ongoing danger. There are harms that absolutely require public exposure because silence only allows them to continue. The question isn't whether anything should ever become public. Of course, some things absolutely should. The question is whether we still know the difference between stopping someone dangerous and making a show out of someone's lapse in judgment, between someone who needs to be stopped and someone who needs shaping. That difference takes judgment and wisdom. Both are slow, and they ask real questions like, who was really harmed? What needs repairing? Is this a pattern or a one-time thing? Are we protecting someone vulnerable or just feeding an appetite for vengeance? We lose something important when we let platforms answer those questions instead of ourselves. They aren't built for proportion, they're built for visibility. A platform doesn't ask what would help a person become better. It asks if the story will spread. It doesn't ask what justice requires, it asks what will hold attention. Once a mistake gets out there, it's hard to keep any sense of proportion. The audience grows, the story gets simpler, the person shrinks, a whole life turns into a scene turns into evidence turns into identity. All of a sudden, the person isn't just someone who did something wrong, they become the wrong thing itself, and the chance to become something else gets buried. I think about kids growing up in all this. They're being asked to grow up in places that remember too much, too fast, and don't leave much room for mercy or understanding. They're supposed to try on different versions of themselves without embarrassing themselves. They're supposed to learn judgment, but never get it wrong. They're supposed to become adults while knowing any mistake could follow them for years, maybe longer. That's a tough way to build character. Character isn't merely about managing how you look to other people. It needs some privacy, room for correction, room to say, I was wrong. It needs room to grow into someone different from the person who made the mistake, instead of being stuck there. If people learn that every mistake might go public or turn into a gotcha, they may not become more honest. They may just get more guarded, more careful about which cards they show and the ones they always hide. And that's not the same thing as becoming good. Goodness needs association. It needs people. It needs memory. It needs people close enough to tell the truth and patient enough not to shrink you down to just one chapter. That's something a local community can still teach when it's healthy. Not always. Local life can gossip, it can exclude, and it can remember things for too long. It can also confuse privacy with protecting the wrong people. But at its best, a real community keeps people whole, or at least it tries to. You're not necessarily just the worst thing that someone's heard about you. You're also the person who helped shovel somebody's driveway, the person who brought food when someone died, the person who coached Little League, the person who always showed up at work the next morning, the person who grew and changed. That last part matters. Changed. Exposure is a poor substitute for responsibility. Exposure freezes a moment. Accountability asks what needs to happen next. Exposure can satisfy anger. Accountability has to carry responsibility. And responsibility is harder, it's heavier, it's less exciting. It actually asks people to stick around after the first rush of feeling has passed. I wonder now what would have happened if my funeral home story had taken place today. Maybe nothing, maybe it still would have been handled privately. But maybe not. Maybe someone would have filmed it. Maybe a clip would have gone around. And I would have become an example for strangers who never met me. And maybe I would have deserved consequences. I did deserve consequences. But I'm grateful the consequence I got was meant to help me grow, not to be consumed by strangers. One question asks, what kind of person might this young man still become? The other asks, what can this moment be used for? We're building a world that's a lot better at the second question than the first. A world that mixes up being seen with being serious. But the chance to become better is one of the most important things a community can protect. Not a guarantee, just the possibility, because possibility is where growth starts. That possibility needs truth and consequences. But it also needs mercy and context. A woman who knew something had to be done. An officer who knew how to make the lessons stick. And a future that didn't have to be burned down in public for a young man to learn. I am grateful for that. Still, because it permitted me to become someone else. Not the guy who threw parties at funeral homes. If you found a way to hold that line between accountability and exposure in your own life, I'd welcome your thoughts. If something in this episode brought someone else to mind, consider sharing it with them or anyone who might appreciate this kind of conversation. As always, a free deep dive companion essay is available on my Substack, humanscalecompanion.substack.com. I'm William Carty. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time. And wherever you are, I hope this episode helped you slow down long enough to notice your own life.